So let's give Eric Siegel a warm UVA School of Data Science welcome. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. I can't hear you. Thank you, Mark. And yes, you're welcome to interject with any questions or save them to the end or both. I think I'm going to try to go through this rather quickly. It's a sort of two talks in once. It's kind of a lot of material. Most models don't deploy, but they could. So to get on the same page, we're going to talk about machine learning as a value proposition in business applications. And then we're going to turn to a problem where they very often fail to actually deploy and realize business value. And this is all sort of a precursor to another, I think it's 88 minutes of videos that we've pulled together. So we'll talk about that at the end as well. I think you've already, that's what Mark already referred to. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, here's why machine learning is important. Business needs prediction. Prediction requires machine learning, and machine learning depends on data. Putting that in reverse, we have data, we give it to machine learning, it generates models that predict, and those predictions improve all the main things we do as organizations. They render more effective all the large-scale operations that we conduct as organizations, which is why we also refer to it for many of these business applications as predictive analytics. In that way, we boost sales, cut costs, combat risk, prevent fraud, fortify healthcare, streamline manufacturing, conquer spam, and win elections. Thank you for your attention and have a great evening. Oh, actually, wait, I'm not quite done yet. The problem is that we're not going to realize all those benefits, all those bottom line impacts, if the model doesn't actually deploy. It's one thing to do the number crunching. It's another to actually put it into operation, put it into production. So we asked data scientists what percentage of their models generated with machine learning with the intention of being deployed, were actually deployed, and we found that the majority of data scientists answered for their projects only between 0 and 20%. Fortunately, the remaining data scientists, a bit less than half, had a wider range of success rates. So in general, we're generating these predictive models that I depict as golden eggs, meant to be operationalized for improving marketing and credit scoring and all sorts of processes, but they don't, because many, many times, seemingly more often than not, they end up sitting on a shelf collecting dust, like a crystal ball. By the way, I had this image created by Dolly 2. It's just a metaphor. It's not really crystal ball, and we'll get to that. So again, I'm going to talk about how machine learning works, how it generates value, focusing as a prime example in marketing, both for direct marketing and churn modeling. And then we'll turn to the other half where we're going to talk about this sort of deployment crisis, why so many projects fail to reach deployment, and what we can do about it. And then we'll segue into how that applies to further coursework after listening to this talk today. So just a few slides about me first. As Mark mentioned, I'm a visiting professor of analytics at Darden. I'm the founder of the Predictive Analytics World conference series we've been running since 2009, and it's very much across industry. You can see at the bottom, we have all these different brands. We have a Predictive Analytics World for business, financial services, healthcare, Industry 4.0, a deep learning world. These are all under the umbrella Machine Learning Week. I'm the author of the book Predictive Analytics. The subtitle of this book serves as an informal definition of the field: the power to predict who will click, buy, lie, or die. It doesn't just rhyme. It alludes to sort of such wide applicability of predictive models. And as sort of signaled with that rhyming title, this is very much not just a hands-on technical book. In fact, it's not a how-to or technical book in the traditional respect. It gets very much under the hood, but it's accessible to all readers and has been adopted as a textbook at hundreds of universities. The Machine Learning Times, I'm the executive editor, and you can sign up there for a free monthly email newsletter. It's a news website. So let's turn to how we're defining machine learning, which means, of course, I'm going to reference the book. This is a picture of me reading to my son, Machine Learning for Babies and Toddlers, which is a real book, and I do highly recommend it for babies, not necessarily for toddlers. I didn't really agree with the definition. Let's work with this practical applied definition of machine learning: technology that learns from experience. By experience, I mean data. It's a recording of history. It's an encoding of things that have happened in the past. And when it learns from that is that golden age model, in order to then predict the outcome or behavior for each individual element or unit: customer, patient, business, vehicle, image, piece of equipment, other organizational unit. So it's at that level of granularity, and that's the defining characteristic when we call it predictive analytics, or when we're applying machine learning for business problems, in contrast to forecasting, which is more typically, hey, over this entire population, how many ice cream cones are we going to sell? With machine learning, it's which individuals are most likely to buy an ice cream cone. However, so each individual gets a score output by the predictive model, usually in the form of a probability. And the higher the number, the higher expected chance that individual will click, buy, lie, or die, like in the title of my book, commit an act of fraud, cancel as a subscriber, any and all behavior outcome that may be valuable for the organization to predict. And then we have to complete the definition here in order to drive better decisions. And this is the deployment part, right? It's one thing to do the number crunching. Now it has to actually be put into action, into production, and be changing existing operations in order to actually improve them. So it's not just a number crunching technology. A successful project needs to get that far. So in a nutshell, we've got data coming from the left into the predictive modeling or machine learning algorithm, which means it's a computer program. And this is the part that's done automatically: the number crunching, the learning from data. And what's learned is in the form of a predictive model, which is rules or formula or something that's then capable in the next step in deployment of producing those scores one individual at a time. So we give it the characteristics of one of those individuals, and then it produces that probability. It outputs the probability, the predictive score for whatever we're predicting for that particular project. So that would be the technical part of deployment. Now the score needs to actually be used to really be deploying it to help with operations. So for example, in marketing, you're looking at a customer today, you're saying, hey, should we apply the marketing treatment? Should we spend the money to send this customer a brochure? If they do, what are the chances we'll have a positive outcome and they'll make the purchase? So the value proposition is prediction is very clear. Prediction as a capability is the holy grail for driving and improving all sorts of large scale operations in general. But where's the credibility? It sounds, as we know, the only thing certain is uncertainty. The weather can only be predicted so far ahead, so many days ahead with so much confidence. So how do we put credibility on the claim that a field puts forward by calling itself predictive analytics? Well, Nobel Prize winning physicist Niels Bohr said prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. Jay Leno, how come you never see a headline like psychic wins lottery? So the credibility here is really simple. The bottom line, very straightforward, although seldom talked about to business users of the technology. But critically, they need to understand that you don't have to predict accurately in the traditional sense in order to drive value. Predicting better than guessing typically will tip the numbers game sufficiently enough to render a dramatic bottom line improvement to large scale operations. So we'll get to an example of that in a second. Let me talk about the mythology around this, however, because this is a really important part that we need to get straight to do the right kind of expectation management and make sure that models actually do get deployed. I call this the accuracy fallacy. Here are 4 real headlines that make claims that are misleading. AI can tell if you're gay. Artificial intelligence predicts sexuality from one photo with startling accuracy. Linguistic analysis can accurately predict psychosis. AI-powered scans can identify people at risk of a fatal heart attack almost a decade in advance. And this scary AI has learned how to pick out criminals by their faces. And what these articles all end up doing is saying it does it really well, it does it with high accuracy, and that misleads even the most technical readers, unless they really pour into the research article behind this, into falsely believing that the model can distinguish between positive and negative cases of whatever it's trying to predict, and usually be right about it for positive cases and usually be right about it for negative cases. And the ability to usually be right on both sides, to be confident with the predictions for both positive and negatives, is like a magic crystal ball. It's not feasible. We can't expect computers to be any more clairvoyant than we are, but we can get them to predict better than guessing. The accuracy fallacy is spread far and wide. Here's only a small number of the different examples that I've seen this fallacy and misdirection perpetuated in the media. And you can read all about it in my Scientific American blog article. By the way, I will provide for Mark the PDF of these slides, which have in the notes, it's got like the links and some other comments and such. So for example, you can link to this article if you want to read more about that. So let me demonstrate with some quick arithmetic the value of predicting better than guessing, even if not with high accuracy in that colloquial sense of the word. Let's say we're doing direct marketing to 1 million customers and it costs $2 to contact each one. Without machine learning, we're just going to do mass marketing and we're going to contact everybody. So at $2 each, it'll cost us $2 million. If the response rate is 1%, that means 10,000 are responding. And if our profit for each response, for each marketing conversion is $220, that means over the 10,000, we get $220. We get 2.2 million back after spending the 2 million on marketing. So we get a profit of 0.2 million, $200,000 from mass marketing. How much better would we do by targeting with machine learning, with predictive analytics? Well, we train one of those golden egg models by trying out the marketing on some small sample, let's say 40,000 customers. And we wait around, see who does and doesn't respond. That's experience from which to learn. And then we use that to generate the golden egg model. And then we apply that model to score all 1 million of these customers. So, and then we order them in the order of predictive score. So most likely to respond if contacted down to least likely. Now, if we took just the top quarter, the top 250,000 customers, the top 25%, if the data was good and the modeling method was doing well, we might get what's called a lift of 3. So that within that, let's call it a hot pocket, those most likely to be to respond if contacted according to the model, we might get an overall response rate of 3%, which is 3 times higher than the overall response rate of 1%. So that's a good improvement. Now, if we use this to target marketing in that way and only contact the top 25%, then like many application areas, what we've essentially done is use the model scores to drive 1 million yes/no decisions, right? And decide which ones belong in this top 25% pocket that do get the marketing treatment. Then we just do the same little arithmetic I did a second ago with a calculator or whatever. It's very straightforward. It turns out that the bottom line profit in this case skyrockets by a factor of more than 5 to a profit of $1.15 million, right? So we've spent a lot less, only 25% as much to actually contact everybody, but we get a much denser response rate. So that turns out to just be much more profitable overall, which is such a dramatic improvement just by more intelligently targeting that I paid my graphic designer, who I pay by the hour, to draw a star explosion thing to emphasize it. However, this model totally stinks because, we don't have high confidence about any positive respondent. We can't point to any prospect and say, oh, I know this customer will definitely or almost definitely buy the product if we contact them. So we don't have that kind of a crystal ball level of accuracy, but there's no question that we do have this business impact, this bottom line improvement. We could alternatively define predictive analytics as a skunk with bling. And you should write it down. I think Mark told me he's going to put that on one of the exams. Okay, so I call this the prediction effect, which is that a little prediction goes a long way. Predicting better than guessing, generally more than sufficient to generate an improvement to the bottom line performance of large-scale operations. Operations where there's lots of micro decisions, essentially. One per individual, whatever you mean by individual. So how does it work? Let's look at what the data needs to look like. The future is the ultimate unknown. It's the only thing that hasn't happened yet. And that's the thing we're trying to put odds on. Nobody knows. But we do have two things with a similar relationship between today and tomorrow, which is yesterday and then earlier today. We know that yesterday we applied the marketing treatment and found out earlier today that there was a positive outcome. One learning example, experience from which to learn. It's all in the past, no prediction needed, but it's an example from which to learn. It's a row of training data. So everything on the dotted line is what you knew at the time you would have liked to make a prediction when you were making a decision about the treatment or not to treat in this case. And then on the right of the dotted line is something that's also already in the past, but came later in time. So if you assemble a bunch of rows like this, typically for many applications, exactly one row per individual, whatever individual means. If you assemble them like this and you have a very long table of examples, and it's typically a lot wider as well because you've got lots more input variables called independent variables. That's called your training data. That's the form and format you have to get your data into. And that turns out to be the biggest technical bottleneck for model generation. So it can be kind of tricky. It's not the rocket science part, but it's generally a specialized database programming challenge. But once you do and you assemble it together, you have the relationship between things that happened in the past and things that happened later in the past. And by juxtaposing them, you do the analysis and you find out insights, like people who go to the bar are higher credit risks. Canadian Tire issues credit cards and looks at how people spend with the card relative to the likelihood that they'll, or relative to the frequency by which they will be late on their credit card bill payment. And it turns out that people observed spending at a drinking establishment miss repeated credit card bill statements more often. So that translates to a higher credit risk. People who are observed going to the dentist, however, are lower credit risks. People who buy the little felt pad to protect the floor from the bottom of your chair or your stool in this case, lower credit risk. Men who skip breakfast in one study had a higher risk of coronary heart disease. Now, these are all correlations that help predict, not necessarily revealing conclusively what the causative explanation is. So it's not necessarily that the meal is improving or affecting your health. This is generally considered to be a surrogate for lifestyle. If you're a very busy person leading a hectic life, stressed, too busy, you skip breakfast, you also somebody for the same sort of original causes to have a higher risk of coronary heart disease. In any case, these are the kinds of insights you get, and they're the building blocks to the model, to the predictive model. And I call this the data effect. Data is always predictive. You get your data into that form and format, you will find correlations that help predict. The model combines multiple such variables. It's a multivariate model in all cases. And by doing that, only improves the ability to make these predictions, although generally not getting to crystal ball level. And as a result, you see millions of case studies. So First Tennessee Bank was able to lower the direct mail cost by 20%, resulting in a return on investment improvement factor of 600% return in investment improvement for targeting marketing because of introducing a predictive model to target more effectively. The retailer Target does target their marketing and these are all improvements gained by introducing machine learning, improved their direct mail targeting by 15 to 20%. Premier Bank Card, which is a major credit card issuer in the US, reduced mailing costs by $12 million. Okay, so I've been focusing mostly on targeting outreach sort of for acquiring customers or selling, right? That's typical direct marketing. The other main hot and most important marketing application of machine learning is to target retention by way of what's usually called churn modeling. So if you look at your customer base as a balloon and the air flowing in from the left is the acquisition of new customers who are always coming in continuously, The air leaking out on the right is the defection, the loss, the attrition of customers leaking out on the right. If you could squeeze that nozzle on the right just a little bit by somehow convincing some of the customers who would otherwise leave to stay, how much more quickly will that balloon be expanding? That's the growth rate of your customer base. But you can't, the problem is that it can be very expensive to change someone's mind and keep them around, typically in the form of a hefty discount, let's say a free phone if they're a cell phone subscriber. You can't afford to provide that incentive to the entire customer base. So the only recourse is prediction. You're looking at a customer today, you're saying, hey, this is a subscriber to the magazine. Are they going to remain a subscriber tomorrow? Should I expend the cost, not only of contact, but of the discount, should they accept my offer on the subscription? Will I lose them as a subscriber? So it turns out there's a plot twist. This is a very common activity across lots of sectors, very notably in the wireless carrier industry, where it turns out when you send a retention offer, we say, hey, we're predicting that maybe you're going to leave. We want you to stay as a customer. Renew your cell phone contract, get a free phone. It turns out that this can inadvertently trigger the adverse response. So the customer who maybe felt incarcerated, didn't, wanted to defect to a different wireless carrier where all their friends have their service or whatever it is. When they see the retention offer, a light bulb goes on over their head because it reminds them, hey, I'm free to defect. My contractual obligation is almost over. So to heck with you. So what you've done here is you've triggered a sleeping dog customer. We want to exercise the adage, let sleeping dogs lie. Don't trigger customers to leave who otherwise would have stayed if you'd left well enough alone. So sort of getting the business, it's not just about predicting well, it's understanding what's going to be the result of actually deploying that model and acting on the predictions, in this case with a retention offer. So taking a step back sort of across broader realm of application areas outside of marketing, we can see the deployment of machine learning as the antidote to information overload that you and I deal with every day in our lives, right? Most notably, internet search. Google search results are ordered based on machine learning, based on a predictive model. The news feed, the default news feed in Facebook, same thing. Which of the thousands of relatively recent posts by your contacts on Facebook are most likely to generate interest and take your attention? Email spam filters operate the same way. And then a closely related area in analytics is product recommendations. So movie, music, all different kinds of products. Match.com presented at our Predictive Analytics World Conference on how they use a predictive model to set people up on dates. Airbnb actually orders your search results in a way that's personalized to you by which ones you're most likely to try to make a booking on. So in general, our experience, it's very broadly applicable, right? Our experience in modern day society is dictated by how we're treated and served by all these different organizations. These are the verbs done unto us, how we're diagnosed, how we're advertised to, and all these treatment decisions, more and more, millions of them a day, are determined based on those predictive scores from a machine learning, driving whom to call, mail, approve, test, diagnose, warn, investigate, incarcerate, set up on a date, and medicate. So I like to call machine learning the latest evolutionary step of the information age, where we've moved from the engineering of how to warehouse, manage, and maintain bigger and bigger data to the application of science, that is the content of that data, what it tells us, what we can learn from it. The thing that's actionable is to learn how to predict from it. Harvard Business Review calls machine learning the most important general purpose technology of our era, and Andrew Ng, a prominent thought leader in machine learning, calls it the new electricity. Okay, so that marks the first half of the talk. Let's talk now about, now that we're in touch with why it's so important and valuable to get models deployed so that they actually take effect and improve business. let's talk about this problem that I opened with, where so many of these models that are developed with the intention of being deployed so often fail to be deployed, with the majority of data scientists putting that success rate between 0 and 20%. Many other, well, not many. There was, before we did this poll, which was, well, it's a survey, there were a couple other questions. And before that, which was a year ago, there actually, it was only a sort of a smattering of related research. The Rexer Analytics does a data science survey, so 11% of data scientists say their models are always deployed. None of them posed the question exactly the same way. One often cited one was from Gartner, where it was basically just an informal estimate from an analyst saying close to 85% of big data projects fail. Of course, big data is a more general word. But in general, there's definitely an increase in sort of anecdotal wisdom and words from my experience of this sort of dilemma. Now, I don't mean that machine learning as an industry is a flop. Even right now, it's a raging success. I mean, even if it's, let's say, a 15 to 25, remember that there's that more than half say it's between 0 and 20%. I don't know where in that range, but even if the overall average turned out to be, let's say, 20% actually successfully deploy, 20% of a lot of projects is a lot of success. The other thing is that depending on the context, there are machine learning projects where you're very, very likely to succeed, even without sort of tackling this problem in a new way. They're already succeeding. One is the big tech companies, where they have a certain kind of critical mass of the right culture and talent and understanding of it, even including the business people. The other is, like, let's say you already have machine learning deployed. If you're just refreshing a model over more recent data and mean to swap it in for a model that's already in operation, the chances of success are typically relatively high. And then we also have plenty of cases where, you know, rare innovators at large, maybe older Fortune 500 companies actually convince major operations to be changed in order to reap the benefits of the actual deployment. Deployment means change, so it's a change management issue. So the paradox is that to get value from this advanced technology, we don't need better technology, we need an improvement in the humans. It's an organizational problem, not a technological one for the most part. We need better understanding and a new organizational process or practice. So the syndrome is that the world fetishizes machine learning, and for good reason. I mean, I got involved in machine learning in around 1991 because I was so excited about the core technology, the idea of learning from data, from drawing generalizations from a finite number of examples, and that in such a way that they then apply, not like a crystal ball, but apply better than guessing over new unseen situations, unseen cases. So that's exciting. But in the industrial world, where we're trying to actually make use of this stuff, being more excited about the core technology than its launch is like being more excited about the design and development of a rocket ship than its launch. Of course, when you turn on the TV, you're going to see a lot more focus on the launch than the interviews with the data scientists. I'm sorry, than the interviews with the rocket scientists, as interesting as the core technology may be. That's where the value, that's where the rubber hits the road. Literally, in the case of self-driving cars, which I think is sort of an allegory in a way, but we can talk about that if we have time. So this syndrome extends very much to newcomers in the data science field, where most of the courses and books jump right into the hands-on. So on day one, you typically start the software, load the data, start making a model, which skips all the pre-production business steps where you're defining exactly what needs to be predicted, how that's going to be deployed, how it's going to affect what operational decisions in what way, and then what data you need to that end. So the whole data preparation part. So this is sort of a typical format for courses that very much is reflected in a typical data science project in industry, where the first thing the data scientist wants to do is just, let's start modeling. We need to reframe the project. So I'll come back to that. And I would say that deep learning, as exciting and promising as it is, actually worsens this overall trend, because now it's incredible, more advanced predictive modeling methods than ever. And the capacity to take very large inputs, the raw signal of an entire image or sound for speech recognition, those capabilities are new and quite amazing. But it increases the fixation on the technology and its potential, rather than sort of having a business process that carves the way that potential will be realized, carves out a path from the get-go. I think that more and more newcomers to the field of machine learning are drawn more to deep learning, whereas the types of applications it is conducive for, because it's often overkill for many of the business examples that I've been covering today, tend to be more speculative. So you're even that much further away from the potential of deployment. So this is not a diss of deep learning. I haven't been so excited about the core technology ever before. Rather, it's the downside in that it's only magnifying the organizational challenge we face in order to actually get models deployed. So the impediments that people name, and this was one of the questions actually in the survey, I didn't give all the details here, but you kind of get it across the board. You know, the boss says no, decision makers are unwilling, they won't actually launch it. They don't think the deployment performance is strong enough, which is probably because of the accuracy fallacy and the failed expectation management. You know, they're seeing these major technical hurdles in the deployment. So of course, you've got this major technical hurdle in preparing the data, but then once you've got a model or it's the scores that it outputs, they need to actually integrate into, especially for decision automation, let's decide exactly which ad to show in real time on a website, this kind of thing. Any of this kind of integration is a real engineering challenge. Decision makers may say, hey, I need to be able to understand the model. I don't care about the statistics. They don't necessarily prove credibility of how well this thing predicts. I need to understand, but this model's too opaque. So there's all sorts of impediments, all sorts of objections that people might put up that get in the way of achieving deployment. But I would say that all of these are symptoms of the same fundamental problem, which is that there is a lack of industry standard practice, an industry standard discipline, an industry standard playbook from the business standpoint, not just the technical tools, but the business process, so that these projects can be managed and all of these different types of impediments can be anticipated ahead early enough and planned for. So along with that new leadership discipline, this is sort of a two-pronged solution. And I'm going to get into the leadership discipline. It's basically a 6-step practice. But you also need to have the business professionals, not just the data professionals, in the know on a semi-technical basis. There's a few things that business leaders need to learn, that they don't know what they don't know. It's not super technical, although from their perspective, it's more technical than they thought they would have to get, which is precisely how are the predictive scores going to be used? How do they integrate? What exactly is being predicted? And how will that prediction affect operational decisions? The performance metrics, not accuracy typically, but maybe something like lift that I mentioned briefly. Everyone needs to be in agreement of exactly what arithmetic we're using to measure what metrics. And typically there's a metric on the pure predictive performance, the sort of technical metric of how well the model predicts. And then there's a business metric, and the two can be a little bit separated. It'd be hard to translate from one to the other, but they both need to be understood by all involved in terms of the goals of the project and evaluation. And then the data requirements to fulfill all of these goals, including, once you've decided exactly what you're predicting, I want to predict who's going to cancel if I don't contact them and they've been around at least 3 months and they've had this spend rate. You have a very specific thing that you're trying to put a probability on. Everyone has to understand that from a business standpoint, and then the data manifests it. It's the data where you actually put that predictive goal into place during the course of the project execution. So the problem is that nobody's accepting responsibility for this stuff. Data scientists tend to say, hey, those are management issues. My job is to make the model. Its value is self-evident. Of course, somebody's going to deploy it. That's not my job. Whereas business professionals are going to be saying, whoa, 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 all this stuff under the hood, what you're predicting, how predictions are used. That's why I have data scientists. I delegate all that over to that team. Case in point, to drive a car, I don't need to look under the hood. Separation of duties. Now that's true. I don't look under the hood of my car, but the analogy doesn't work that way. In order to drive a car, there's a whole bunch of expertise that you need. Very deep expertise, momentum, friction, the way the steering wheel works, expectations of what other car drivers are going to do. In order to drive a machine learning project, it's very much analogous. You need to know exactly how this thing from a business standpoint is affecting business operations and all the sort of business decisions that guide each operational move. Now, on the back of that car is a bumper sticker, and it says, start with the business objective, which at this point, I think has kind of become a platitude. It's true that like any other technology, there needs to be some business value, some business objective from the get-go. It's not just let's use cool technology. I think that in general, most people already know that. There's already consensus, there's already agreement, unless you're kind of drinking the AI Kool-Aid and you think you can install the system the same way you would onboard a new employee, a human employee, and then just allow them to on their own volition, take control, take agency and make things happen. No, this is a particular technology used in a very particular way. But that bumper sticker isn't enough. It takes a business process. It sort of takes, well, in this case, at least 88 more minutes of videos that we're going to hand over to you after my talk. And I'm getting close to wrapping up here. But let me make a couple other points about this practice. So this is a practice that elicits collaboration between the sort of technical side and the business side through all 6 steps. So let me list the 6 steps just to make this concrete. Again, this is not the rocket science part. It's very straightforward and intuitive once you sort of look at what these 6 steps are. So let's talk about the last 3 steps, and then I'll talk about the first 3 steps. The last 3 steps are the same, are just the standard thing you always have to do with machine learning or predictive modeling, right? Prepare the data, give it to machine learning, and it makes a model that predicts, and then that model gets deployed so that those predictions, those predictive scores are now improving operations. So the first 3 steps are the pre-production. Everyone needs to get into agreement across the enterprise of what exactly is the business goal. Okay, I want to decrease customer churn. To that end, what is the prediction goal of that golden egg going to be? Okay, I want to predict, as I mentioned before, customers with these attributes, who've been around a long time, so we care about them. They have this expected value, and whatever the and all the conditions are. I want to predict which of these customers are going to cancel or decrease their spend by 80% in the next, and then you have to pick a time window in the next 3 months. So you have to get that kind of semi-technical detailed, but all the details are business relevant. So in that first step of the business goal, it's generally, what am I predicting? And then what am I going to do about it? How is it actually going to get deployed? You're planning from that deployment for the deployment from the get-go in the first step. The second step fleshes that out in more detail. So you're saying exactly what you're predicting in that level of detail. And that's where you're interfacing between the business details and the technical capabilities. And then number 3, also pre-production, you're making that decision of which metrics, which performance metrics are we going to be applying to evaluate the project. So this 6-step process needs a name, and I've come up with a name, and I never told anybody this before, other than my wife and a few friends. And I'm going to try to see if I can coin a buzzword and make it really popular. So you were here first. You're the first people I'm telling. It's not AutoML, which is a technical solution. It's become a pretty big buzzword, trying to automate a lot of the typical data science activities of the data prep and just choosing which model and the model parameters. It's not ML ops, which is a set of technical methods and technical guidelines and best practices for the management, development, and deployment of models. But that's all the technical side. Again, this six-step thing that I'm naming for you right now, for the first time ever, is not a technical practice. It's a business or organizational practice. And drum roll, it's BizML, the business practice for running machine learning operations. So I'll be interested to hear whether you think that's a cool buzzword and if it stands any chance of taking off. I think it may be a fool's errand to try to coin a buzzword, but I mean, I had to give it a shot. Okay, so just to wrap up, essentially to get this into play, we need to reframe, reconceive the way we think about machine learning projects, because mostly what we've been talking about is just a technical project, the data prep, the predictive modeling, the actual development of that model, and then its deployment, its integration, which might use ML ops. But those are all just, that's the technical project, and that's well known. There's this whole other half of a machine learning project if it's going to be successful, which is that we have to see it as a business discipline involving ramping up business side stakeholders to understand those semi-technical aspects and weigh in on them. They need to understand it so they can participate. Right, plan that deployment from the beginning. So it's sort of a backward planning process. Select the metrics, all these sort of business side aspects that involve the technology and involve relatively technical concepts, right? From a data scientist perspective, that's not technical at all. From a business side perspective, it's extremely technical. So we have this sort of no man's land that needs this bridge that needs to be gapped. A gap that needs to be bridged. I think that would be a better way of putting it. So this is all a change management method. So now we have this whole other half to the project. In fact, it's not just the other half, it is the project. The technology should be part of what is a business practice. Instead of calling it a machine learning project, which in and of itself could be a big part of the problem, we should probably call it an operations improvement project. And then in parentheses, that uses machine learning, critically, but the technology doesn't drive the business drives the technology, right? That's a platitude, and this is how we're manifesting that platitude. So I can only conclude really with the same list that I've already given. It's 2 prongs. People need to ramp up on the business side, but the data scientist, the technical side, needs to ramp up as well, just to understand, hey, there is this need for a business side practice. The recognition of that need typically kind of comes after painful lessons, several years into your career. That's sort of the stereotypical way it goes down, but it doesn't have to, because this could become an established standard. So I'll just leave you with a quick overview of the additional videos. So it's 14 videos, but they're all short, and all 14 of them listed here amount to 88 minutes. And these take the concepts I've described today and bring them into more detail. Like there's a whole video about defining that prediction goal statement, that kind of thing. So everything I've said today is sort of an intro overview to the business side practice for machine learning projects that we'll call BizML, right? So start spreading that, start using the word BizML. And then today was the overview, and then these will take on more of the details through those 14 videos. So I'll hand it back over to Mark for questions, awesome. And also because he's going to describe some of your work that will apply these concepts.